says connecting, so it'll be here in a minute.
Yeah, you were glitching a little bit earlier. I don't know.
Hopefully
The winds of the island were getting you.
Oh man, our Wi-Fi out here is horrendous.
Lucky you have it, man. I don't know how they connected to the mainland.
It's satellite. Here where I am. There's broadband up the road, but this is satellite. Congressman Bishop.
Yes.
Hey, how are you doing?
I am chagrined and I apologize.
Hey, no big deal. That's what Andy, so I've got Andy Moon on here. He's one of my friends, an attorney from Texas, and he does good interviews. So I brought him on just in case I stand here like a deer in headlights.
Well, that's okay. I wish I had a good excuse. I really don't.
Oh,
I fell asleep and forgot.
I think 6 o'clock on a Memorial Day weekend, I think that's a good enough excuse for me. We're glad you joined us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I was telling Andy you were my teacher in high school, so you have a really unique perspective of everything that's going on now. And I told him what you told me earlier about, you sure you want me to do this? I'll be a little bit negative. But yeah, really interested in your perspective, just because you have such a unique perspective as a congressman. And really, one of the things that I wanted to ask you just to get it kicked off is, now that we're 2 months down the road on this coronavirus stuff, how do you think we've done as a nation? Do you think we overreacted, underreacted? How do you think that we...
Look, I don't want to necessarily kind of fudge on this answer, but I'm going to.
Okay.
Look, you know, a teacher never gives a grade until they actually have all the data in.
Right.
We're still in the middle of this thing. And no one knew why this started or how or what's going to happen, why some people get it and some don't, why it affects older people more, if it's going to come back and morph again, if it's going to change. Everything we're doing is just flying by the seat of our pants, and we're making it up as we go along. And the experts that are giving us advice, all they're doing is their best guesses. Right. And it's going to be a while before you actually have enough data and experience to look back and say, gee, we really screwed that up, or that was appropriate. The only thing that bothers me right now is everything that we are doing so far has been done by an executive order, by someone in the executive branch, whether it be a president, more by governors, health departments. And that is frightening to me, that when those kind of executive actions take precedence and start creating policy with totally ignoring any of the other branches. So the one thing that we have to do after we start getting out of this is to go back and rewrite or relook at the laws that created the power that has been allegedly used for these executive orders, to make sure it's clear, and come up with protocols so that the legislative side is going to be involved in any kind of, because we know there's going to be another emergency, someone's going to call it in the future. And I don't want it to have this kind of vague power simply by the executive branch taking over authority without having some check and balance system in it, and to protect due process.
And that's what's been really scary for me. I'm in Hawaii now, and Hawaii is they're very draconian in their measures. And then you compare that in other places like Texas or Utah or Arkansas, and it seems like there's not a uniform decision-making power. There's nothing uniform in the country. Some places are locking down while other people are open. And I think that causes a lot of the civil unrest that's going on right now, or not the civil unrest, but the civil, all the animosity, I guess you could say, amongst social media and everything else. So how do you, going forward, how do we make sure that they don't get too much power from us? And how do we kind of keep the power as public? And how do we right the ship at this point when we're midstream?
Well, I don't know. Maybe you have to just kind of go through the process and see how it plays out. And the idea that there is not one central approach, to me, is a plus, simply because this virus is not uniform throughout the country. Even within the state of Utah, let's face it, almost all of the cases are in Salt Lake, Provo, and Park City. Up in Brigham, I think the last numbers I saw, we had like 26 cases total. 5 had not recovered. That's vastly different than what's in Park City and Salt Lake City. So I don't think you need the same kind of standards and the same kind of protocols up here as you do down there. But the only people who can insist upon it are people. It's citizens have got to hit their legislators, who I know are actually kind of riled up about the fact that all these things are done by executive action. They want to become involved in the system and just insist that their elected officials go through the process so that if this happens again, there's going to be a cleaner, smoother, and understandable way of reaching it. Like I read this article the other day that in the history of the world of endemics and pandemics, there are only two reasons or two methods that we get out of them. One is medically, and somebody finds a vaccine and you shut it down. You end the virus. The other is just social, in which people say, I don't care if it's still out there. I'm not going to live this way any longer. That's, I think, is going to be the result of this one, of people just saying, yeah, to hell with the virus. I'm just going to go out. I'm tired of being afraid and cowering in my bedroom. But they're the ones that are still going to have to insist that the elected officials go through there and come up with a plan so that it's not just make it up as you go along.
You know, Congressman, I haven't seen an issue this divisive in a long time that's really not really politically driven, right? The people that aren't wearing masks versus the people that are wearing masks, the people that want to go out and the people that don't want people to go out. I don't know what that means for us as a country. I don't think I'm seeing it across the world as much as I'm seeing it in the United States, where people are upset that you want to go back out and go into the public sphere. How do we, from a top-down leadership level, tell America it's okay to go back outside?
That's a really good question. I haven't actually thought about it. The one thing that actually any kind of top-down instructions is going to be counterproductive. What the government has to do is not tell you how to live your life and how to do it the right way. What they've got to tell you is what they say as the options that they have, give you the best medical advice they have at the time, realizing that's still best guesses, and allow people to make decisions for themselves. It's not the role of government to tell you if you go out or not. It should be the role of government to tell you what are the odds, what are the chances, what may or may not happen, and they'll let you make those decisions. And that's part of, I think, what people are rebelling about. Those who are frustrated and don't want to wear masks and don't want to stay inside, those are the ones who are frustrated by saying, here is an executive agency that's telling me how to live my life. And they instinctively don't like that. And I think that's also one of the reasons why a less heavy-handed approach is the right way. People have got to make decisions for themselves.
How do we know what
ought to make decisions for themselves?
And I agree. How do we know what the right decision is, or how much is media influenced? How do I ask this question the right way? How do we know what media is true?
Do we trust them? That's the question you're wanting to ask.
Yeah.
Do we trust the mainstream media, and how do we do it?
And which part of the media do we trust? Because it's so different depending on who you listen to.
Because the media is diffuse, and I think that's not necessarily bad. The only way you can do that is on any other issue with the media. You listen to all of them, and then you decide which one you actually believe. There is no one source that has the answer, because, to be honest, we don't know the answer. That's why I'm bemused sometimes by saying, let's just follow the science. Well, the science doesn't know the answer. The science are just making guesses right now. Only time and looking back will tell us which science was accurate, whose views were accurate. So giving some flexibility to people in areas and realizing, I was on a call with a lot of my colleagues who are in the Bundestag in Germany, because I've been involved in that exchange for a long time. And the one thing I had to remind them is that, the United States is a much more diverse country than Germany. Utah is as big as Germany is. And within my own state, there's different diversity. Within the United States, there's diversity, just as there is in Europe. So what's happening in Italy is far different than what's happening in Sweden. What's happening in Germany is different than what's happening in the United Kingdom. And they should have different responses to it, which is what's happening in the United States. Georgia is different than New York, which is different than Utah, which is different than Hawaii.
Right.
And maybe that's good. That's not necessarily a bad thing.
So what role can the federal government have in this to make sure that the response is appropriate, since it is so diverse in all the states?
The first question I have to ask myself is, ought the federal government be involved in that decision? The federal government, well, because of the size of the cost of the program, the federal government has to be involved in some way of giving financial concepts to make sure that the country doesn't just fall apart. And that's what we have done so far, but at a tremendous price. Whether the country should be the ones that tell individual states what to do, I don't know. This is where the concept of federalism is one of shared power and responsibility. There are some things the national government should do. There are some things the state should do. So one of the questions I had on a radio interview was, who's responsible? Is it the president or the governors? And the answer is yes. Each of them should be responsible for certain options that are within the framework of of what they can do. And the federal government can step in and tell states exactly what to do. I just think it's the wrong approach to do it. Whether I agree with what the president wants to do or I disagree, he's got to have his. It's got to be a very restrained approach.
So with every state having kind of a different approach that they really need to take, which governor do you think has done the best under the circumstances?
I'm sorry, I slide a key element of that question. What would you do again, please?
Which governor do you think has done the best in managing their state in the current crisis?
To be honest, I don't know. I kind of like what Kristi Noem is doing in South Dakota, and that may be just because I know her, but she is one that's taken, I think, a very hands-off approach. And let's face it, maybe it's because it is South Dakota, and South Dakota in the winter is always frozen anyway. So it's, everyone wants to stay inside in South Dakota in the first place. I like what she's doing. I do appreciate Gary Herbert's approach in not making a mandate statewide, but giving local areas where the need is different some flexibility. It's still all done by an executive order from him, so I'm not really crazy about everything he has done, but he has, I think, been very cautious in the state of Utah, and I think that's the right approach to be. He hasn't tried to go out and try and mandate statewide approaches to every health district.
We've been I'm in San Antonio, Texas, and we've had, the Attorney General has come out and said, not only has our county overstepped their bounds from the county commissioners level and made unconstitutional mandates, but so has the mayor. And it's heavily Democratic here, and I feel like it's kind of political. But one of the things that came out, the reason I want to ask you this question as a professor and as a teacher, is they're doing money for education, where they will basically give you $450 per credit hour to go to a trade school or go become a pure programmer. How do you feel about these programs? Are they viable, or is it just something that people are doing for political gain?
I'm sorry, I don't know enough about the specific situation to do it. Sometimes giving loans and grants so that people can, let me say it this way. I used to teach speech. I'll get a complete sentence out eventually. The checks that we gave, the $1,200 we gave to everybody, except for me, I didn't get it, but the $1,200 that went out to everybody, I understand why that was there. It was an effort to try to help people through this bad time when they were all losing jobs and the economy was everywhere. But that is a dangerous precedent, just to give money to people just because. And there are so many ways that could morph into something that's really bad, that is a scary approach to it. What you're talking about of giving people financial incentives to go and try different tracks of educational learning is really what we have been doing all along. It's a different monetary value now, and maybe a different concept. I mean, we've had scholarships and government grants forever to allow people to make their choices. As long as people are still free to do what they want to with it, it actually could be a very positive thing, especially if it provides some competition between education services that are provided.
Are you okay with it if it's not merit-based? If it's, you know what I mean? You're not really qualified to be a computer programmer, but we're going to go ahead and let you come to this program anyway, just because we feel sorry for you.
Look, I'm one of those few public school teachers who has never been fearful of competition and never been fearful that something has to be approved before it can be used. If the consumer is satisfied, if the parents of the kids are satisfied, I don't care what the merit pay program says. That's good education. If the person that's accepting the program and going through the program is satisfied, that's good. Whether it's been accredited by some other entity, some other executive entity out there, is probably one of the worst things that could happen. It's kind of like, the GI Bill after World War II. I think the most incredible part about the GI Bill was that was the money that was given, and then the person who had the stipend went out and put it wherever he or she wanted to. And that allowed colleges to actually start competing and trying to become more efficient and effective in attracting those kinds of students. So it just depends on what the parameters are of what they're doing in Texas. But on the surface of what you said so far, I don't think I have a problem with it.
That leads me to two questions. So I'll ask one and then I'll ask the second one later. I've got a property up in Coloma, Michigan that I was going to renovate it to make it an Airbnb. I went back out there recently to try, after construction could get back to work, to try to hire guys. I can't hire anybody because they're making more money sitting at home, collecting the $600 a week plus their unemployment, to where if they took the job with me, they'll make less money doing what they've been doing for the past 10 years of their life. And that's where I'm starting to get nervous, is I almost feel like a lot of mindsets are becoming very socialized, where they expect money for free. They expect the handouts. How do we get society back to wanting to go back to work and chasing that American dream, and with that passion and vigor that's made us who we are?
That's one of the fearful parts about just giving everyone $1,200 in the first place, which means the only way you can handle that is by cutting it off eventually. And that's what was so nervous, the $3 trillion bill that we passed last Friday, horrible bill. But part of the thing that made that so bad was it was an extension of all of those payments. So if you give somebody a payment just because you happen to be there, some sort of government money just for existing, and it goes to everybody, that can be a terrible precedent to start. And it's for exactly what you're talking about. Is the expectation is you don't want to have that cut off in any way. So making that truly an emergency one-time shot, getting over with it, that's going to be essential. And what you're saying is true. I know within some of my own family members, they were already hesitant to actually apply for unemployment, even though they had been laid off. And because they waited so long, they didn't get as much money as they would have had they hit it up right away, but they felt better about themselves for having waited. And getting off of them, I'm happy they wanted to get off of that as quickly as possible. So it's one of the things the federal government gave it, but it's got to be ended. It can't be continued on and on above and beyond what was the original intent.
Is there a plan for? I know that I had some friends that had deceased relatives that got the $1,200 mailed to them or put into their bank accounts. Is there a plan to go back and try to pull that money back, claw it back in any way, or are they just planning on letting that sit in estates?
No, there is the effort on behalf of the government agencies that sent that money out, that if it was fraudulently given or improperly given, they can go back and get it. The biggest problem, obviously, is that the effort and the cost of going back and getting it may exceed the amount of money that was given in the first place. And that's just the breaks of the beginning. You have a large government. But yeah,
it was weird because nobody asked for it. It just showed up in your bank account, which was really a unique thing.
Yep, and that was supposed to be a good thing for people to cut the red tape and the bureaucracy that goes along with it. But whenever you have large government, for everything that's good, there's obviously going to be something that's going to be screwed up along the way. Which is why you want to have government doing these type of programs at the local level possible, because they really are much more efficient than the federal level.
How do we pay that back without and still avoid hyperinflation?
Good question. Now that is the concern we have now. I guess the only thing that maybe no. I don't know. It's got to be paid back by at some point of the game. That's why I also didn't want to go further, because there was the effort to try and help bail out cities and communities for programs that were not virus related, where they had basically just been incompetent and they ran up a debt. I don't want us to get involved in any of that for that very reason. Somebody's got to have to pay for it. I don't want my constituents paying for New Jersey screw-ups in their state government. But it's got to be paid eventually, and so far we really haven't grappled with what that is going to be. And in fact, there's a bill I'm actually trying to fight that has political motivations behind it, to try and have $1 billion a year as a guaranteed interest to give to the federal government so they can buy up more land and create more federal programs with it. And it seemed like it was unstoppable until this hit. And all of a sudden now I'm hoping that we can slow it down by simply saying, look, do you really want to create another mandatory $1 billion a year spending effort when you've got when you're in the trillions of dollars and you've got to repay this COVID? Government has got to actually sit down and say, look, there has to be an end to this kind of spending. We've been nice long enough. Now we have to be realistic, because it has to be paid back by somebody. And that's why I'm grateful that I'm old and ready to die, and you're the one that's going to have to pay for it.
And that's why I'm afraid of it. Which leads me to the second question. Well, it doesn't lead me to the second question. The other question I had, being a teacher, and now the schools are shut down and we're questioning if kids are going to go back to school, I fear of social problems with the kids, child development problems later on, the kids that are abused, abuses are way down right now because the reporting is down, because there aren't those people seeing the abuse happening. What do we need to do to be able to get the kids back to school, protect the kids, still thrive in child development? What do we need to do to get back to where we were, even improve that system now that we kind of have a pause?
They've got to make up what they missed. And that's all there is to it. For the schools, I think it's imperative they have to open up this fall. And let's hope that there isn't a rebound of the virus, so there's an effort to close everything down again. You close it out again, it's going to be very bad. The other part about education that really scares me is, even before this came about, there was a mindset that was out there that teachers are not necessarily professionals, but they should be facilitators of technology. And you don't need flesh and blood teachers up there. You can just put kids on a computer and have them through the programs. Programs will be written by the companies that are selling the schools the computers in the first place. So there's a market-driven force that's right there. But all the teacher you really need for a teacher is to just kind of robotize them and make them the facilitators of the technology and let kids work at their own pace. That has some value, but it also has a whole lot of limitations and instincts. And the idea that we are going to morph education into something that can be technologically driven and only technologically driven, so you can do it at home as well as you can do it in the classroom, takes away the human interaction that I think sometimes inspires kids. So, I mean, you were in my class and you probably hated it and I traumatized you forever. But there are some kids that actually find a relationship with a flesh and blood teacher that inspires them to greater accomplishments. And if we just try and use technology to overcome this, I think we're going to screw things over big time.
And that's one of my fears,
because I'm already seeing it big time.
Well, that's one of my fears. I was a horrible student. I didn't do well in school because I didn't do the homework well and I didn't do the studying well. I tested well, but as far as a scholastic student, I was horrible. I sucked at it. But it was the teacher interaction, and there were a few teachers along the way, a couple there at Box Elder. You were actually one of them that I really, even though I was a pain in your ass, that I really kind of bonded with in my own way. And it got me interested in history and politics down the road. When I left you and then I went on a mission and came back, I had a teacher named Peter Pizer up at Northwest Community College. And he was also he wasn't what I would have expected to see. And he really kind of surprised me. And those relationships are what got me interested to do my own studies in history, to read my own books, to analyze things in my own way. If you would have taken the teacher interaction and the peer interaction, if I didn't have other kids to talk to and wrestle with, and then the teachers that I bonded with, I would have taken a completely different route now, because the straight scholastic education was uninteresting to me. So you would be taking away from me the stuff that really drove me. And I really feel like a lot of entrepreneurial minds and a lot of artistic minds, that the school system isn't made for them. It's made more for the ones that follow the regiment systems. So for myself, going online and expecting to learn from a robot online, I wouldn't log on ever. I would have all F's and I would have been into drugs by now, I'm sure. So that's scary to me.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why there needs to be a whole lot more freedom in education. I mean, the cliche is let teachers teach and let schools create their own standards. I actually believe it. We have tried in public education in the 20 years I've been out of education, and the almost 30 years I was in education before that time, tried almost every wonder program around except for freedom. And there has to be the ability of letting parents and kids, the common cliche is kids will take the easy way out. They'll take the easy teachers. I think that's bull. I think kids want to be entertained, yeah, but they also want to be educated, and they know the difference between the two. And in reality, once you give them some kind of authority to make decisions for themselves, I think they will make the decisions that are best for them. And I also think it's the same thing with their teachers. But what we need in an education system is to give some kind of freedom and flexibility, because there are a whole lot of niche kids. There needs to be some niche program that's out there that can attract those kids. And that can't be done if you lockstep everything together. And that's one of the reasons why I was never afraid of vouchers. And it always bothered me when the union was telling me that we can't have vouchers because the kids have to go to the public school, because if you give them the freedom to choose, they won't pick the public schools. That was insulting to me as a public school teacher, because I knew in my schools there were good programs that could attract kids. And if they weren't there, we should be having greater flexibility and ability to create things that will attract kids and keep them motivated. So it's one of the fears I have, that we may come out of this pandemic thinking that all education can be done online. I just don't want us to go down that road.
I believe that the best education comes from mentors and people that you respect, and so you want to follow their life a lot more than what they can teach you in a school book. So I agree on that.
The social interaction's been a big challenge for us, because my daughter she's 6th grade, just starting to make those social connections and learn how to work with people, and that's something that she's really taken a big backseat on. And she doesn't even call, kids don't talk on the phone anymore, it's texts, and they don't get on Zoom calls either. They'll just text, and that's all they do. Speaking of schools, I know you said that you don't like to give a grade until you have all the evidence, but if you had to grade House leadership, so let's talk about Pelosi, let's talk about McConnell, and let's talk about Donald Trump's performance midterm here. How do you think what kind of grade would you give the three of those people?
You're really trying to screw me over, aren't you? And a lot of this has a political tilt to it as well. I think Donald Trump has outperformed my expectations, and my expectations were not necessarily low to begin with. I told you I was always fearful of his predecessor, Obama, in the last 2 years of his administration, not the first 6 when he was facing elections, but in the last 2 years when he wasn't facing, that's when he went hog wild with executive orders. I was fearful that Trump gives a lot of executive orders, but I have to admit that the vast majority of those are simply to repeal executive orders that I thought were wrong in the first place. So every once in a while, when he makes statements like he can force something to be done, I start kind of wondering that no, you can't. But those are really not the norm. Most of what he's doing, I think, has been very positive, very good. He has a different approach, which I actually think is good for our relationship with other countries. He is not the kind of suave, sophisticated, you have to read between the lines. He's very blunt, and he's very obvious with our allies, and it shocked them to no extent, but at least they know what he believes in. And I think it's going to be helpful in the long run. But what is really helpful is our adversaries hear his blunt talk, and they also recognize that too. So what he's done for the economy, I think, is good. What he's done on repealing executive orders and reducing regulations, I think, is very good. His foreign affairs is blunt, and it is difficult for a lot of traditional diplomats to take. But I think there's a lot of good that's in it.
He's blown me away, I will say, on the world stage. He's really blown me away there.
And I don't agree with absolutely everything that he has done. There was one executive order he had on smokeless tobacco that I thought the order he made was the right thing to do. But I didn't think the president on the federal level should be the one doing it. So even if he was right, it was one of those things, it's something the federal level ought not to be involved in the first place. With Speaker Pelosi, you have to realize I've only had like 4 speakers from whom to judge since I have been here. Oh hell, she's the worst. As far as organizational skills, we have the same problem this year as we had before. Like, I'll give you, no, I won't give you a classic example. Let's just say the first time she was in leadership, it was always running by the seat of the pants. We never knew what was going to be on. We never knew when we were supposed to be in the floor. We would get updates from the whip staff that said simply, hold on, be available, something will happen soon. Horrible at trying to back plan. Of all the speakers, she was the worst at managing the floor and making the trains run on time. I also think the worst thing that has ever happened is the last vote we did on Friday, which created proxy voting. That to me could be the death spiral of legislative experience. The biggest check to an authoritarian position is a deliberative body, because they slow everything down. Her effort to have proxy voting so we don't have to show up and give her the proxies and then she can just continue on is a continuation of consolidation of power. Already too many bills are written in her office and don't go through the committee process. This will exacerbate it. With that proxy voting process, it's going to make it possible for 20 members of the House to sit on the floor, introduce, amend, and pass bills by themselves. It's the wrong thing to do. It's the wrong approach. I don't care if there's a virus and people are afraid of it. Get over it. Figure out a way of defeating the virus, coming back and doing the work. But a deliberative body has got to be a way of slowing down authoritarian decisions. She is more authoritarian than any of the other speakers. And she was the only Democrat speaker I've seen either, but much more authoritarian. There are Democrats that I am grateful did not kick her out of office and replace her as speaker, because I think they would have been much more organized, and that would have been much more difficult for Republicans to then get control again. I mean, let's face it, Nancy Pelosi is the kind of person, well, she said it best when she once said, we have to get more natural gas into our economy so we can get off fossil fuels. I love that kind of logic.
I like that we have to pass it so we can read what's in it.
That's it. What does the Constitution have to do with this anyway? Yeah, yeah.
Who would be a good Democratic leader that you think would be somebody that the Republicans could work with and actually get things accomplished?
Well, that's the last thing I want to let people know about. I do think Steny Hoyer is
it won't happen.
Steny Hoyer is the majority leader right now. I think is somebody that we on the other side respect as somebody who's very competent. I don't know if we agree with his philosophy, but I think he has a great deal of competence. And it really does become personality driven. So I'll give you an example. I had, the last time we were in the minority, I was on an education committee in which the chairman was a total jerk. Everything was done in a partisan way. I had the practice in the past of actually trying to go and talk to the other side and their staff and explain what I wanted to do. He is the only one who refused to talk to anybody on the Republican side. He would tell me, I'm not going to talk to you until you talk to my personal staff, who would tell me, we won't talk to you until you talk to the committee staff, who would then say, we're not going to talk to you until you talk to the personal staff. And I finally said, just screw it. On the other side, I was in the Armed Services Committee, and the chairman was Ike Skelton, who had the mindset that he wanted to be bipartisan. And on one of the markups we had on the National Defense Authorization Act, I had totally screwed up. There was a company in Utah that had hit me up to try and help them out with temp poles to try and get a level playing field against the Chinese on Army temp poles. And I said, yeah, I'll do it. And they called up like on the second to the last day of the markup and asked me how the amendment was coming. And I just went, oh, crud. Because I had totally forgot. It was kind of like this podcast. I had just blown it away. It was totally my fault. So I went to Ike Skelton, the chairman on the opposite party, and I explained what the situation was. And instead of just saying, tough, Rob, better luck next time, he turned to his staff and said, Aaron, can you work with him and see if we can get something worked out? And indeed, his staff and my staff worked together. And the very last amendment on the bill, on the very last night when we were doing the markup of it, before we did the final passage, he brought up my amendment and looked at me and said, Rob, we can do the amendment if you promise not to say anything. And so I just waved and thanked him. And I got the amendment in because he wanted that to happen. He didn't have to do that. He just wanted to do that. And that kind of mindset is the one, those are the kinds of people that I will, even if they're Democrats, I will do whatever I can to help and assist.
That's cool. Yeah, I don't hear a whole lot of people working together up there. And I don't know what it was like. You know, growing up, we didn't hear as much because it wasn't as prevalent in the media. But I'm sure it's never been real hunky-dory up there. But it sounds like right now it's more divisive. And even a lot of career politicians are saying they've never seen it this divisive in their careers.
Yeah, I have the tendency of thinking we look at the history and we have a strange way of how we look at history. I think it's always been divisive. We look at how everyone loved Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan got along with Tip O'Neill when they went out to drink afterwards. And I read some of the stuff from the books that were written at that period of time. They were really, they were as snotty back then as they are today. So I sometimes think it's always been that bad. But there are individuals that do have the mindset that you want to help them and try to work together. And there are other individuals that just have a self-important arrogance to them. And those are the kinds I'd like to get rid of.
So I gave you a pass on McConnell. So how's McConnell doing in this process?
I don't know. I don't know. And to be honest, I'm not trying to be cute here. I just don't know about how he interacts with people. I know I have frustrations with the Senate in the first place. all senators, I can't say anything nice about them. I mean, to us, the Democrats are the opposition, the Senate's the enemy.
Right.
Henry Hyde had a great line at one time where he said the Senate and the House are very similar. Each has 100 really stupid members. So I have problems with the Senate and some of the Senate rules and the procedures they have. And from my outside view, I think McConnell is doing a pretty good job of keeping everyone together and being efficient with it. But I really don't know enough to actually evaluate how good he is or compare him to anybody else.
Let me ask about another one. Do you know Jason Smith from Missouri?
Yes, I do.
So I went to law school with Jason, so I would appreciate it if you see him, you tell him I said hello.
So
he's a good guy.
Tell him he's in the pandemic effort. He's growing a beard now too, so he's looking a lot like you.
Oh, good.
He's a good guy. I appreciate him.
Yeah, he's a cool guy. I really liked him.
So Rob, I don't want to take your whole night, but one other question that I had is going forward, considering China, conspiracy theories aside and everything else, there's obviously a trade war going on between us and China. How do we make sure that we emerge from this still up on them and we don't give China the hand up politically, economically, and on almost every other way?
We are in a trade war with them. It's an ideological war. We're also in an arms race with them. People just don't consider that at all. They are the amount of money they are putting into militarization and the upgrading their weapons system should be frightening to every American. And it is one of those situations where, as we're dealing with China, you have to realize they're a very autocratic country. They're very patient in their autocratic approach to it. They realize that Americans really tend to be very impatient, and we fluctuate from place to place very quickly. And if they just wait us out, they can win. I think as we deal with China in the future, it cannot be from the point of view that they are really ever going to be our friends until they start to open up their society. Like when I was a lot younger, I made my first trip to China with a bunch of, and I was in my 30s, and a bunch of other state legislators. And this is just when Deng Xiaoping was opening up the economy. He was allowing Chinese people to have some freedom, having open markets, not as much government control of the economy. And we were all there saying, look, this is obvious, that as soon as you give people economic freedom, they're going to demand political freedom. And they did that at Tiananmen Square and were crushed by it. And since that time, we have found out that it's not the traditional thought we had. China has given people their economic freedom and allowed them to grow very quickly because of that, but they have also not given any of the political freedom. And we have to keep that in mind as we're dealing with it. The Chinese government does not operate the way we do. They do not see the world the way we do. And it is one of the most fearful things we're doing. And it's not just the economy, it's also the military. I'm very fearful of what they do. And the Chinese, I had a briefing once by a military guy who basically said the Chinese know our environmental laws and they use them against us. They know all of our laws and all of our weaknesses, and they use them against us. We have to be very vigilant about that.
Is there anything Congress can do to try to, what I'm understanding right now is that you've got a lot of Chinese enterprises purchasing U.S. assets. Is there anything Congress can do to try to limit that takeover?
And it's not just U.S. assets. I mean, there's the world. Just in uranium, and this is something the United States could do by opening up our own uranium mines and sources again. But we're getting all of the uranium that we need desperately to run this country, as well as to run, like, even if you're going to have a green economy, you got to have uranium to run it. We're getting it all either from Russia or former Russian states or from China. Even though there's absolutely no uranium in China, they're buying up uranium mines in Africa, so like Namibia, and they're exporting that uranium into the United States. So when we look at our critical mineral supply chain, we have to realize that even if China doesn't have that supply within their boundaries, they have gone out of their way to buy it in other places so they can control that kind of supply chain.
Wow.
Yeah, Congress needs to react to that. We need to open up our own critical mineral industries. We need to put on limitations on what we're getting not only from Russia, but also from the Chinese, and realize that a lot of stuff they're buying comes through third-party approaches to it. I'm also nervous about all the Confucius institutes that we have on public schools and public campuses, which have a specific political purpose to them, even if it is an infusion of new money that the schools desperately need. I have concerns about that.
I just heard about those the other day for the first time. I'd never heard of that issue. And that sounds like it's pretty significant.
Yeah, and I hope we realize what it is before we become dependent upon it.
Well, and I had a number of foreign exchange students that through the years that have lived with me and gone to school. When we lived in Layton, we had 8 foreign exchange students in our house. A number of them have been from China, but really all across the world. And we still keep in pretty constant contact with everybody except for the Chinese foreign exchange students, because they don't have a free platform to be able to log on to Facebook and message us there. They only can get in contact with us when they leave and they go to another part of the world. And it's one of the things that scares me a little bit watching social media and the media, that anything that's an opposing opinion is now fake news or trying to be shut down or censored or cut off. And I wish that people would appreciate the opposing views a little bit more rather than trying to silence those that they don't agree with.
Yeah. You've probably seen the Chinese people are wonderful people.
Yeah.
The government is different. And I guess you can say the same thing about the United States too.
They're actually, the Chinese kids have been some of our favorite kids that we've had in our house, but the ones that have been in our house are obviously not on the poverty side of things. They're a little bit wealthier because they're obviously able to afford to travel abroad and be here for a while. But it's interesting what money can buy them. One of the kids was in our house. He had multiple brothers and sisters, and we questioned him about that. And he says, well, we can afford it. And that's basically what it comes down to, is you can pay the right to have, back then, before they lifted those laws, you could pay the right to have more kids. But he also said that they censored the information that came to them so much. And so there was a brainwashing that went on from the Chinese government to the populace of what was right and wrong. He expected something totally different, or they did when they got over here, from what they were taught the U.S. would be like. So it was really interesting, the relationship that developed with those kids.
Yeah, that's a fascinating story.
Yeah, it was actually in 2010. I had lost my income from the last crash, the last economic downturn, and we were pulling our kids out of school down there in Layton. They were going to Layton Christian Academy, and they called us up and said, hey, if you can house 8 foreign exchange students, we'll basically pay all of your bills for the year. So we brought in kids from China, Rwanda, Australia, New Zealand, Mexico, really all across the globe. And we had a couple of foreign exchange students the years before that, but we had 8 of them in our house all at the same time. And it was really crazy to watch all of these kids from different parts of the world. They got along fabulously. We never had any arguments hardly in that house. They were all great friends, and they're still great friends today. And there were Maoris and white kids from New Zealand that in New Zealand, they probably wouldn't have got along as well as they did. But in our house, best of friends. Chinese kids and kids from Korea that got along fantastically. It was just really interesting that they didn't know not to get along yet. And it was,
Yeah.
That's cool. And having that many teenagers in your house, I feel for your parents.
it was actually, it was when me and my wife were married. So it was our house that we had them in.
Oh, it was your house.
It was my house.
I
Yeah. I was in real estate.
Now I feel for the kids.
Right, of course. It was actually, I thought it was going to be the worst year of my life. When I saw the first kid walk in, he was a kid from Mexico, and he walked in, he was a good-looking kid, tall, walked like Oscar de la Hoya. He walked in and gave me that little cocky head nod. I was like, oh, man. Next kid was a kid that came in from Rwanda, equally as cocky, tattoo on his arm, gold chain around his neck, and I was like, but those kids, my kids wound up going and spending 2 summers with that kid from Mexico. He came back and went to college with us. We're still great friends with him and his entire family. The kid from Rwanda still calls my wife mom. We still get along with them great. So I thought it was going to be hell, and it's just what I had to do to pay my bills for a year, but it wound up being such a great experience that I wouldn't take it away for anything. And my wife would say the same thing. It was one of the best years we had. So
Cool.
and cultured us quite a bit. So a couple of the
Cool.
kids have come back and stayed with us since then. They've come back and stayed for a month and a half since then. So it was good.
Now Congressman Bishop's got me all nervous. I got to go read up on China. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking this is so much more important now to have a military supporter like Trump in office for the next 4 years. What happens if Biden were to win? What do you think he would do to the military and our response to China's rebuilding efforts?
I don't know. I hope he would be responsible. Look, the last time the Democrats took over, what was that? I think it's 2006 when they took over in the House, and they said they had a plan to fund their domestic programs without actually raising taxes, and their plan was to cut the military. In that ensuing decade, there were 4 major reductions in the military. There were 2 major reductions in military manpower, which was even more frightening, to the point that we basically changed our military approach. We used to have this concept that our military had to be good enough to fight a 2-front war. Now we have changed it to we have to be good enough to fight a 1-front war and contribute on a 2nd front. We used to say that if there was a nuclear exchange, that no casualties were acceptable. Now it's minimum casualties are acceptable. And when Obama talked about, drawing that red line in the sand in Syria, I was scared to death because I knew we didn't have the resources to actually fulfill that. We were stretched too thin. Fortunately, since Trump came in, it has been a change of attitude. And to me, it's been a bicameral change, but also a bipartisan change. Even the Democrats on that committee have realized we cut way too much in that from 06 to 16. We're now, having turned that around, starting to rebuild it. So the ability of us to spend more, I give credit to Trump, but I also give credit to the fact that Democrats on the Armed Services Committee have fully realized we went too far and we have to start rebuilding our future. So as long as they believe that they can't pay for domestic programs by cutting the military spending, and that they have to realize there is a real threat from the Chinese. And actually, to me, there's a real threat from the Russians, not necessarily in that they are a bellicose country, but they have all sorts of weapon systems and nuclear weapons, and they have an economy that is worse than Italy's, and they have a declining birth rate, which means the demographics of Russia are going to make them more volatile in the future than they have been in the past. Those 2 things we have to realize that we need to be cognizant about it. And I said earlier, yeah, we are in an arms race with the Chinese. We are. And there are some areas where we have maintained leadership, but there are some areas where we have given up leadership, and I don't want us to, we have to be very vigilant about that. So I don't know how Biden will approach it. If Biden approaches it saying he's commander-in-chief and he has to have a good military, we might be okay. If he goes in there saying, no, let's cut back on the military because we spend more than any other country, we have to spend more than any other country. If he does decide to do that, we're going to be in big trouble.
That's interesting. I didn't think we were going to go down this route on this interview. So, I think this is going to be eye-opening for a lot of people to watch this.
Last question that I have to ask you on the national or the world platform: how do you feel about us funding the WHO or defunding the WHO?
What? Say what?
The World Health Organization. How do you feel about funding or defunding them?
I defund it.
Good.
Defund it?
Defund it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that any of them have America's best interest in mind personally. I mean, they're not looking at us and wanting us to be the best. They're obviously have other reasons or other people that they want to bring to power also.
I think, Trump's had a pretty good stance on that recently. And I've been very confused about, I've got the World Health Organization, I got the CDC, obviously Dr. Fauci is saying what he says. I can't figure out who to follow. And the worst part about this whole situation has been my kids living in fear because of what they see on the news and then what's repeated to them. and my constant reminder to them, God's in control. And if you left this planet tomorrow, what would happen to you? And that's what you need to worry about. You don't need to worry about any such stuff. It's been very difficult. The fear that has been pushed, I think, on young America.
Yeah, I see that even within my own family in different ways. Different kids react to it. I have, well, yeah, I have some family that have OCD, and this is horrible for them. I mean, and others that are that I think are trying to become Fox commentators. So it's a different approach to everything. And one thing is, I don't want to be too critical. Yeah, we have all these organizations, we have all these experts that are telling us, and some of what we're hearing is conflicting. To me, I have to realize that we simply don't know enough about this to make definitive statements. These people have much more expertise and knowledge than I have about it, but they're still making best guess estimates. That's why I would never want to go and try and sue a doctor for malpractice, because they don't know necessarily, unless it's really egregious. They're just doing the best they can in making decisions, and their decisions are usually going to be a hell of a lot better than mine, but they still are best guess estimates. And so you give it credit, but you can't be given, it's not an absolute.
Yeah.
Well, Congressman, I didn't want to keep you forever today. I wanted to tell you a quick thing that why I wanted to reach out to you for this interview, and then give you your last words, unless Andy has anything else. But I don't know if you remember senior year of high school, I passed the test better than you thought that I would. You pulled me out in the hall and kind of put me against the wall, literally against the wall and in my face, and told me you thought that when I took your class, you thought that I was way in over my head and was just a dumb kid. And after passing that test, you realized that I had a lot more potential. And you were really angry at me, thinking that I was going to waste my potential. So you were influential in my future. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to ask you, is because you really did make me think that I didn't want to fall short on my own abilities. So, and your ability to be forthright and honest about every situation is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on and talk to you, because I knew firsthand that you didn't pull very many punches.
You're, you are kind. I appreciate that. I think what you basically said is, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but
none of us do.
My staff and family know that too.
None of us do in the end. It's all just doing our best, right?
He thought you had potential. That's what he was talking about.
That's right.
Yeah, and who knows if he's right or wrong. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, we'll get you there.
So thank you, Congressman. I appreciate it. Anything you want to leave with this before we end this? And I don't want to take your whole night.
No, I do appreciate this opportunity of talking, and I've had wonderful experiences in my life, but the best experiences were still in the classroom, and it was kind of the relationship that I had with kids who it was kind of this. I actually don't know how to describe the relationship I had with you as students. I didn't think it was like a student-teacher relationship. It wasn't really friend-friend. It was somewhere in between.
Yep.
But I appreciate everything you did and all the crap you gave me.
I'm probably responsible for a few of those gray hairs. So thank you, Congressman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Eddie. We'll talk to you guys both soon. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.